Some of the focus on coronavirus outcomes around the world are a little perplexing. We hear a lot more about the pandemic in the US, but the mortality levels have actually been higher per capita in the UK. They've had a strong lockdown in London, then it was eased, and now Boris Johnson has imposed stricter restrictions again. And they've started arresting protesters, anti-lockdown protesters in London. Let's cross live to London now and catch up again with Brendan O'Neill, the editor of Spiked Online. Politicians around the world are just grappling with this dynamic, aren't they, Brendan? People say it's a choice between the economy and our health. It's far more complex than that. No one's got anywhere near the sweet spot.
That's right. And I think at least we're talking about the economy now, because for a long time, people weren't even paying attention to the free fall that the Western economy is going into as a result of the COVID restrictions. Britain is heading for the worst recession on record. There are millions and millions of jobs on the line. Poverty is going to increase. And as a consequence of all of that, there will, of course, be ill health and excess deaths, as the government itself is now predicting. It's now predicting that the COVID measures will cause excess deaths too. So at least people are now factoring into the discussion the possibility that our cure for the COVID virus could prove to be as bad, if not worse, than the virus itself.
Now, you've seen an element of hypocrisy from authorities in the UK too that we've seen elsewhere in the world, and that is that police and other authorities who have allowed Black Lives Matter protests during coronavirus lockdowns have suddenly become very aggressive about the way they break up and arrest anti-lockdown protests.
Yeah, I'm afraid that the way the police have behaved in the UK is staggering and very hypocritical. We now have a highly politicised police force, because the situation is that, police officers in London took the knee to the Black Lives Matter protesters. They actually bowed down to them. They also allowed Extinction Rebellion protests to go ahead. But when there was this anti-lockdown protest in Trafalgar Square at the weekend, they used extreme force. We saw riot police actually hitting people and throwing people off the streets and trying to prevent them from speaking. This is now, it looks like, a police force that is woke, that is politically correct, and which will allow your protest to go ahead if it adheres to the outlook of the chattering classes. But if it doesn't, you're in trouble and they will throw you off the streets.
Now, there was a line in your latest piece for Spiked Online that really leapt out at me, and you just said that liberty, democracy and reasoned discussion have all suffered greatly over the past 6 months. I think that's so important, because we've had so many people willing to accept whatever is thrown at them by the authorities, and there's been this perverse sort of portrayal as the choices, the sort of zero-sum game choice. You're either for a full lockdown or you're for letting it rip. When the actual argument, as you say, it should be a reasoned debate about all sorts of costs and benefits.
It's so hard to have a reasoned discussion about this stuff now. I mean, anyone who questions the lockdown or questions whether COVID-19 is quite as bad as we first thought it was will be called a COVID denier. They'll be called wicked, evil, someone who doesn't care about old people dying. Of course, we've seen this precedent before with the climate change debate. Anyone who questions climate change alarmism is called a climate change denier. They try to silence you. The point is, I think we need a reasoned, balanced discussion about how to have specific targeted measures to protect older and vulnerable people from COVID-19, while allowing the rest of society, healthy younger people, to carry on working, to carry on being productive. That's the kind of debate we need, and we haven't had that over the past 6 months. And as a consequence, our societies are going to suffer enormously.
You know, no one pretends that easy, but that's obviously the way we ought to work towards. That's what we should be discussing. And the great tragedy of the past 6 months is that while we've been having this debate and having overly draconian shutdowns, they've dropped the ball in so many countries, including our own, on protecting the vulnerable.
That's exactly right. The same thing happened in the UK. The same thing happened in the state of New York. I think we had such a lockdown myopia. We became so obsessed with locking down the whole of society that we allowed our attention to be distracted from the people who really did need our help. That's older people in care homes and, of course, people with underlying health conditions. The virus was allowed to run riot in care homes here in the UK. It caused an enormous number of deaths, and we failed to protect those care homes. So we got the worst of of both worlds. We locked down healthy people and we didn't shield vulnerable people. So going ahead, we need a rational debate about how we can protect older people, which will be difficult, but it's not beyond our capacity to do that, while at the same time allowing younger people and healthy people to carry on working. If we don't have that debate soon, we'll be in trouble.
Spot on, Brendan. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Brendan O'Neill there, who's the editor of Spiked Online. You can Google that and read his stuff there. He's often published in The Australian or The Spectator Australia. And go to Spiked Online. You can listen into his podcast as well. Sign up for that.